Welcome back to Recharged in 30. I'm your co-host Nafisa.
I'm your co-host Samina. For those of you who follow Nafisa's work, you may be wondering where the electric vehicle episode is. It's here, this is it. But before we get into it, Recharged in 30 is brought to you by Naked. Hassle-free, instant online insurance. Naked Financial Technology is an authorized FSP. Nafisa, you have been testing EVs for a long time. Just for a little throwback, what is the first one you drove and what is the experience like?
Oh wow, this is indeed a throwback. I actually drove the Nissan Leaf, the first ever EV to come to South Africa. I drove it, I think, in 2015, which was almost 10 years ago.
Wow.
So this is funny. When I drove the car, it had a very, very, very small battery, 24 kilowatt hours. So that promised 195 kilometer range. To give you an idea now, though, the GWM Aura, the cute little hatch, has a 63 kilowatt hour battery that gets about 385 kilometers of range.
Wow.
And maybe a bigger BMW iX SUV with a 105 kilowatt hour battery can do around 500 kilometers. Back to the Leaf, I got nowhere near the 195 kilometers promised, but I also didn't understand how it all worked at the time. It gave me, I think, just under 130 kilometers. And you can imagine, of course, this is range we're talking about. I started feeling something I couldn't quite explain. I was very concerned about going anywhere or using the aircon or like accelerating too hard.
Oh, wow.
I actually Googled it and it turned out there's a word for it. This is called range anxiety. So like when you're afraid that you'll run out of battery before reaching your destination. How wild is that? And that's how I came to know about this phenomenon that is called range anxiety. So this Nissan Leaf also had a Type 1 charger, but the standard now in SA is a Type 2. So think of Type 2 as like a USB-C cable to be shared amongst many devices, and the Type 1 maybe as a lightning cable for iPhones only. Thank goodness there's one standard, which means any EV can be used at any charger.
Oh, good. I'm a big fan of the USB-C and can super relate to wanting there to be one charger to rule them all. So I'm super glad. The range anxiety sounds terrible, especially when you're used to like a fuel car and there are petrol stations pretty much everywhere.
Exactly.
So you don't have to worry about the infrastructure supporting your need for power for your vehicle. So yeah, I guess we'll talk more about like how to overcome that later on
Yeah.
and if we have the infrastructure to do that. So the tech's come a long way since then, since 2015. What have been some of the changes that have most like stabilized the idea of EVs in consumers' minds?
So I think infrastructure is key to the growth of EVs. It's great to follow and see all the brands who are investing millions and millions of rands into rolling out these chargers. DC chargers are significantly more expensive because of how fast they charge, and you're paying for that convenience. But South Africa has come out on top a few times globally, actually, from reports by the International Energy Agency. They published the Global EV Outlook report, which I keep an eye on. A few years ago, we were ranked 5th in the world for the proportion of chargers we have in relation to EVs. So we had about 5 or 6 EVs per charger, and at the time, the global average was 25 EVs per charger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but we've also to put that into context, EVs are expensive here, and it's still a luxury buy. So while there is progress with the rollout of public charging stations, you have to remember that if the cars were more affordable, we probably would not have had that ratio. And also credit to Jaguar, I think, for rolling out the very first public EV chargers nationally on our highways. They actually called it the Jaguar Powerway. So back then they installed, I think, over 20 chargers. It linked the N1, the N2, and the N3. So you could actually make a trip between Joburg and Durban, or Joburg and Cape Town, or via the Garden Route and East London, which made longer road trips possible. So BMW also has rolled out chargers, as did Audi and Mercedes. And credit to Audi for rolling out the first 200 kilowatt fast charger in the country. It's at Mall of Africa, which I've used many times. And all the manufacturers who roll out chargers also include it in their dealerships and entice customers with some discount attached to it, or by letting you know that you can charge for free at the dealership. So I think if you live close to a dealership that does that, I think that's one incredible incentive to get an EV and never pay for charging, and ultimately not worry about the fuel costs. And another change over the years is that the battery technology has been improving, and we're getting more efficient batteries with more range.
That is actually amazing that we have such a high ratio to EVs. But like you say, it is still like a luxury buy. And speaking about road trips, have you ever been on an EV road trip?
I've actually been on 2 road trips. They were very different to each other. The first one was an electric vehicle road trip Africa. It was the first on the continent, and it took place over 9 days, like from Pretoria to Cape Town. They covered 2,000 kilometers. But I didn't actually drive the 2,000 kilometers. I did one leg, like from PE to CT. It was like 800 kilometers, I think, and it was just shared amongst others. It was quite fun. We did it in 3 days and 2 nights. But I think it wasn't a true reflection of an EV road trip because there were chargers, temporary chargers brought along the way for us to charge, and just to make it like a first of its kind.
So it wasn't like a full reflection of what can be done between those distances.
Yeah, I think
at
it
the
was
time.
just to show the capabilities, that what's out there and the potential of it. And there was another time I did a road trip. I was writing for one of the publications, and they had given me an Audi e-tron, and my husband and I, we took it to Mpumalanga. It was quite a fun trip. We stopped, there were chargers along the way, and then there was someone else at a charger. It was such a shock to me because, oh wow, you're driving in the middle of nowhere and you're like, oh, there's another BMW at this charger, so I gotta wait. It was quite funny. But yeah, those are the road trips I've been on. The Audi e-tron was more fun because it was more natural, and it was like during stage 6 load shedding. It was quite interesting to document. It's written on one of the articles I write for. So if anyone wants to read it, just let me know.
I just thought of this now. Were any of the charging stations affected by load shedding at the time?
No, because they had some backup power at the time. Like I know Audis have like backup powers, even BMWs. So it just depends where you are. But I do remember that trip actually, now that you just mentioned that. We were very limited in terms of what we could do. So we drove all the way to Mpumalanga, and then we chilled at our hotel. There wasn't enough range, funny enough, to do a day trip somewhere, or like a little go sightseeing, that kind of thing. So we stayed in the town.
Oh, to like drive around Kruger for 8 hours?
No, that's not going to happen ever in an EV.
Yeah, there's
But it
no
was
way
fun.
to charge there.
But
is there actually a place to charge there? Like, does Kuza perhaps have?
I actually haven't looked at the Kruger particularly, but in Mpumalanga where I was, there was a charger on that main road.
Okay.
And one of the hotels had one.
Speaking of charging, you mentioned earlier about chargers and that you can charge any. I always thought that the different car chargers would have different ports in a way. But you're saying that you can use them you can charge your EV on any public charger?
Yes, so this usually comes to a surprise to most people. The easiest way to explain it is using that same USB-C analogy. All electric cars sold in South Africa use what is called the Type 2 connector. It's the same standard in Europe, which is where we get most of our cars from. But this means all chargers will support that same Type 2 plug. So you can take your BMW to an Audi charger and charge there. And the same way you can take your Volvo and charge it at a Mercedes or GWM at a Jaguar. The companies who roll out these charging stations like GridCars and Rubicon, the two main ones, they supply the brands for their customers with a little RFID card. It looks like your regular bank card or credit card. And this is tied to your vehicle. You can then load it with credits, and this is what you will tap at the charging station to initiate the charge and then end it. They are all compatible with each other. I actually have my own little charge card. I was given one at the launch of the Jaguar I-Pace in, I think, 2019. So it's linked to GridCars. So I can load it with credits from the GridCars interface and charge the cars that I get. I've done it before to track the costs, but because this is still a new thing, when I do get a test EV, I'm mostly supplied with a charge card.
Oh, okay. So speaking of costs, what does it cost to charge an electric car? Is it like an easy thing to calculate? Because with the way Eskom bills us, especially on prepaid, how do you go about that?
Yeah, Eskom and their billing, let's not go there. But so there are a few ways to get the cost of charging an EV. Firstly, if you do it at home, it will be the cheapest. So even though Eskom does have a complicated way to bill us, like based on the time of the month or the usage and that kind of thing. So before the last electricity hike this month, I was paying around 2.20 per kilowatt hour. And the easiest way to calculate a full battery is to take the battery size and multiply it by that rate. So that 63 kilowatt hour battery I mentioned on the Aura earlier, it would cost me 136 Rand and 60 cents to charge. But this is based on charging if it's completely flat on 0%, which is never going to be the case. I mean, if you think about when you recharge, that would be extremely irresponsible to take it down to 0%. And also, it's not even recommended that you charge that way, or like if you want to prolong the battery of your car. I usually use this when it approaches the 20% mark, then I'd consider the recharge. So back to the costs. So if you want to use public chargers, as of the last tariff update, I think from GridCars, they roll out, by the way, 90% of all the EV chargers in South Africa. Their last tariffs are 7.35 Rand per kilowatt hour on the fast DC chargers, which I mentioned were expensive, and then 5.88 Rand on the AC charger. So using the same Aura battery as an example, it would cost me 463 Rand to charge the Aura at a fast DC charger, like say a Mall of Africa, and then 370 Rand at a slower AC charger. So there's a big difference between these prices, and you can tell that why it makes sense to charge at home.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that does make sense. But I suppose if you're out and about, it's worth
Yes,
it to
you're paying for
charge
the
quickly
convenience,
somewhere
literally,
else.
yes.
Yeah, and not have to wait the time it takes at home. So how do you go about charging your EV at home?
So some of the manufacturers, they've been offering home chargers for free with the purchase of your car. I know Mercedes does it. They like whatever you pay for the car, you get a free home wall box charger. The same with Volvo, I think. Theirs is like a very nice kit worth 70,000 for certain models. A lot of them are trying to make value for the customer. So when you're buying this very expensive car, you are getting a home charger. And they also want to make you avoid going to these public chargers. You need that convenience of like charging your car overnight, to get like a full charge. Otherwise, you can just trickle charge when you have a moment. I know we haven't been experiencing load shedding for a while. So you can kind of do it overnight if that's what you want to do. But it also means you never have to go to a mall unnecessarily and spend money at a coffee shop while you're waiting for your car to charge.
Okay. And this might be a silly question, but is there any like installation involved? Or do you plug it in to your existing like?
Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned.
Adapter. Yeah.
You definitely need an electrician to install this wall box. It's a home wall box charger. You can't. Some cars, like I think the Mini or the very earlier ones, you do get literally a small 3-pin plug. It's like the slowest charge. But the best thing for you to do is to buy a home wall box charger, even if the car you're buying does not support one, or rather does not give it to you for free.
Okay. Just it's hilarious to me how you could charge a whole car using a 3-pin plug.
Yeah, it's very, very, very slow.
Okay, cool. So I know you're a big fan of EVs and want your next car to be electric. What is it about them that you love so much?
I am indeed. I also have my own EV charger installed at home, so I'm ready. But that actually happened when a company called EV Charge, they reached out to me after reading like some of my write-ups about EVs to let me know I was not getting the full experience of an EV because I was relying on charging at a mall, for example. So they actually offered me a media discount to purchase one, which I thought was very proactive on their part, which I appreciate. It did change my experience a bit, so now I don't have to keep saying, I need to go to a mall, it's like 6 p.m, let me quickly dash before it closes kind of thing, and then I have to sit and waste money paying for coffees or whatever. But the reason I love EVs so much is that it's a silent drive when you want it, and there's the instant torque, the not worrying about the petrol costs, the cool interfaces that comes with it. There has to be some sort of visual element to it, so it shows your consumption in real time, which I love watching, and I love the graphs, the stats, the data, all that kind of thing. So this all feeds right into that. I also see it like a giant gadget that you charge the same way you charge your phone. And one more thing, it's going to be modern, and deep down we know it's all about the tech and matching software, so that speaks to me. Did I ever tell you about the time I actually drove a BMW i8 hybrid?
No.
It's silent too, like an EV, because hybrid.
Yeah.
So I switched the car on, I switched it off, and I switched it back on. I thought nothing had happened. It was actually quite funny. I was at a launch event, and I only felt a little embarrassed that I didn't know that this car was actually switched on. Because it's silent.
Yeah,
but it's on.
But it sounds like such a weird experience. Like it would mess with your head.
Yes.
Did it?
It actually, yes. So this is actually one of the biggest adjustments to driving an EV, I would say. It does mess with you, I think. Firstly, you're starting a car to complete silence. It's unlike any other experience you would have had with a car or know to be. And then you're driving in silence. I mean, it's a weird thing if you don't happen to be listening to music or have the radio switched on. I think it gives you time to ponder and think about life and left alone with all your thoughts. I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but sometimes the silent drive lets you think about stuff. I think the other adjustment is also having all that power the moment you put your foot down. There's no gears, there's no engine. There's just that instant torque, that power. So whatever maximum amount of power comes from this car, you will get it immediately when you put your foot down.
I think I remember being in one of the EVs with you. Which one was it? That beautiful blue one in the front had that gorgeous...
Oh, the iX?
Grill.
Yes, the BMW iX.
Yes, what was that? It was so
the
stunning. And like the speed at takeoff is actually very startling.
That one incident.
When you first feel it. you just sink into your seat.
Yeah.
Oh
exactly
wow.
That.
It was amazing though. It was amazing to have that kind of power just at your feet tips.
Toe tips.
Toe tips. And speaking of adjustments, how much mental work does it take to make sure that you don't get stuck in the middle of nowhere with the range anxiety? How do you deal with that? And do you have to plan a lot around it?
So I touched briefly on it earlier. It was just such a weird experience to wonder whether you can get some from A to B and not worry about running out of charge, being stranded. And the country we live in, you don't really want to be stranded anywhere. But I have to say, over the years, range anxiety has become a thing of the past. I used to worry about it, like for events. I'd literally look it up on Google Maps and check if I have enough range to get home. But now that the tech is getting better, we're on second generation and upwards of the tech, and they're becoming more efficient batteries. And also, I like that some of the cars now come with like different driving modes, like an eco, your normal, your sport, your comfort, or like individual. At the touch of a button, you don't have to stress about anything. You just go straight into eco mode. Sometimes when I'm driving and I feel like, oh, actually, I might be about to run down, then I'll just hit the eco mode and I'll just drive home comfortably, knowing it's not giving me that extra power. It's not wasting the range. It limits the power that the air conditioner uses. So all of this happens in the background without me putting in that extra effort, where if I was driving in a normal mode, I'd have to think extra, or don't accelerate too hard, or use the aircon in a certain mode, So eco mode has been really great for this kind of thing.
Where you compared charging your car to charging your phone, the eco mode reminds me of like ultra battery saver.
Oh yeah.
When you have very little battery power. But I suppose you can do that at any point, and then you don't have the risk of putting your foot too hard down.
Exactly.
And then like using your battery up.
Like I said, you don't have to think too much. Sometimes you're just tired, long day, whatever the case is. You just want to drive without thinking too much.
100%. So let's talk a little bit about the EV market, because this is very exciting to me. There's been a lot of movement in the past few years, and Chinese SUVs and indeed the EVs have given South African drivers a lot more options. I'd love to hear where you think this is all going to go.
I love the competition. I think the more products we get, the more the consumer has choices, and that's a big win for everyone. Well, consumers. So the Chinese EVs, they are coming in fast, and they clearly have the advantage of being cheaper than their counterparts. NAMSA, the Automotive Business Council, the authority in South Africa who tracks all the stats and stuff. So over the years, if you read their stats, you can see how the Chinese manufacturers, now I'm referring to all cars and the EVs, not just EVs, how they're gaining popularity, they're climbing the ranks, and they're making it into the top 10 most sold brands in South Africa, whereas previously it was your trusted brands that were on the top, and now they're losing market share. It's an interesting dynamic to follow, which reminds me of what I saw in the smartphone market when it comes to handsets. We know that a lot of South Africans prefer Chinese handsets because they're cheaper, and because they also, even with the automakers, they offer more value to the customer, where other trusted brands, we're not mentioning names, but they make you pay for extras. With these cars, you get those extras as standard, and that's the differentiator. And in a country like ours, cost is most crucial. Everyone wants to know what value they're getting.
100%. I am one of those South Africans who really loves a Chinese handset. So if their cars are offering so much at the standard offering, then I don't see why. I suppose as people get to know the brands a bit better, then they'll opt in quite quickly. But yeah, especially now, cost is a major factor. And speaking of cost, I remember when you told me that EV prices were so wildly high because they were being classified as luxury goods in the same category as golf carts. Is that still the case?
Unfortunately, yes. EVs are still taxed higher than normal ICE vehicles because it falls in that luxury category. It's actually crazy to think how much a car costs abroad, an EV, versus what we're paying in South Africa. I mean, not just EV, if you look at all cars. This is actually the reason why EVs are not even mainstream in South Africa. You might notice there's a lot of cheaper EVs in China and Europe, very cute little ones, but they'll never launch in South Africa currently because what it would eventually cost when it does come here, and that's really unfortunate. For now, it's a lot of expensive premium EVs that are the main ones. But slowly, we're now seeing more EVs come in at under 1 million, which is still a lot of money, of course. But now we're getting to that under 500K mark. I think it's very interesting with all the Chinese EVs coming in.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see in the coming years how this all pans out. What has been your most interesting or exciting EV that you've ever driven?
I think it has to be, without a doubt, the BMW i7. I got to drive it in California for the international launch. It's one of those cars that's where you need a chauffeur to drive you, or you can drive it. It's a toss-up, whether you want to be in the driving seat or in the back seat, and I'll tell you why. It has this massive 31-inch 8K screen in the back. You can go into theater mode. The screen falls down from the roof, and you have a little mini cinema in the back, basically.
Wow.
But not just that. I got to experience the self-driving mode, which is called Driving Assistant Plus, where I could remove my hands from the steering wheel and let the car drive for me, but it was obviously capped for speeds up to 130 kilometers an hour. Yeah. So this feature, yeah, exactly. I could remove my hands from the steering wheel. It's not live in South Africa. There still needs to be regulation for that kind of thing. But I think it was just so cool to do that and to make videos, and knowing what I'm doing is legal. It just doesn't sound right, but it was. So obviously that's going to stand out for me. And then in that same car, so I accidentally, when it was my turn to drive, I don't know what I did. I think I closed the blinds and I actually blocked all my view from the back, from the rear view.
Oh my God.
I panicked, and in that moment, because the car supports voice commands, I was just like, hey, BMW, open the rear blinds. And what do you know, it in the same single command, no mistakes, natural voice, it opened the blinds for me. So that was pretty cool. And it made me realize that's a very good use case for voice assistants. Before, when it first came out, I was like, why do you need a voice assistant in your car? But now, as the cars get more complicated to drive, things are hidden in deep set menus, it's easier to just say, hey, directions to Santon City, your Google Assistant, which is kind of what I do now. So I think that car definitely stands out for me.
And I suppose the more functionality you get in a car, the more the car can do by itself, the more handy voice commands become, like blinds.
Exactly.
Like, first of all, lots of cars don't have blinds, but when they do, it's really nice to be able to tell the car.
Yeah, I mean, I was driving on the other side of the road. The steering wheel on the other side was way too complicated. I panicked, and that was the most natural thing I did, and I can't believe how brilliant it was.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, and I do also want to know, what has been your least favorite?
So, speaking about least favorite, I feel really bad to even say it or mention it, because I actually wanted to love this car. I wanted to own this car, the Volvo EX30. I spent a long-term period with that car. It's a very cute little car, but it just had too many software issues. I mean, it's like, if you ever think there's too much tech in a car, I feel it's this car. It has a very minimalist dashboard. There's no buttons except for what's on the steering wheel. Everything is done via touch screen. So you have to tap and go into deep settings, and it takes a while. It's very time consuming. And then if the internet doesn't work, like mine gave me issues in the beginning, I couldn't actually use Google Assistant. There's no speedometer. There's no driver display in front of you.
Oh my word.
You have to look left to the center console to check your speed and everything. And then the car tells you after 3 seconds, you need to pay attention and look ahead. So I found that a bit counterintuitive. And then it beeps for everything, because Volvo, as we all know, is a safety first car. It's going to beep for little things like your speed, lane keeping, or it'll try to draw you to something. So I feel like it's such a weird thing. After we spoke about range anxiety, this car gave me just anxiety, because it was beeping for no reason. I didn't know why. It was very frustrating, I won't lie. And I think it's so sad, because a lot of the issues I experienced was all relating to software. There has been a bunch of software rollouts. This car has been recalled globally for software glitches. It's just such a pity that this was my experience with the car. But for anyone listening, I do have an article published on Recharged on the Volvo EX30 if you do want to read my experience with the car. Yeah.
Okay.
Such a pity.
Yeah, because it actually looks very cute and like exactly the kind of car you'd probably end up with.
Yeah, and it also has a very cool feature. It goes from 0 to 100 in 3.6 seconds.
Gosh.
It's like one of the fastest cars. I mean, obviously that's not why I wanted to love it, but that was a cool feature. But I'm all about preserving range and driving responsibly.
100%. And I mean, like, you can't, like, these cars are so dependent on all of their touch screens, etc., working like at peak.
Conjunction with each other.
You can't afford for any internet connection to go wrong, and like it controls so much of what you do with the car.
Exactly.
So like that stuff has to be absolutely pristine, otherwise you are in big danger. Sure. So not the greatest. Hopefully they sort out their software issue.
Yeah, hopefully
and,
a software upgrade
it could become an option again. I don't know, after your experience, if you try again. But yeah, there'll also be so many options, as we spoke about. Wow. So this was a really great episode. I super enjoyed it. I've learned so much about EVs, and I hope you all have too.
And speaking about EVs, remember you can get a quote for yours on the Naked app or website without making a single phone call. Naked Financial Technology is an authorized FSP.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next one.